Welcome to the Money Insights Podcast, where high-income earners come to learn wealth-building strategies that will take them from high income to high net worth. With your hosts, financial and wealth-building experts, Christian Allen and Rod Zabriskie.
Welcome into another episode of the Money Insights Podcast, where we talk all things money and business. My name's Christian Allen. I'm here with my co-host. You know him as Rodney the Pod Zabriskie. Rod, what's up, my friend?
Hey, glad to be here, and I'm glad it's just about summer.
I'm glad it's about summer too. It's time for warmth. I was just mentioning, we live in Utah, obviously, right? I like it to be warm about 11 and a half months out of the year. So I like a snowy white Christmas, but then like warm sun the rest of the year. That sounds perfect to me.
Okay, well,
am I in the wrong place, Rod?
You're in the wrong place. That's not going to do it for you. Yeah.
Okay.
So it sounds like you need to live somewhere a little further south for most of the year and then visit during Christmas.
Okay. So I'm going to be the opposite of a snowbird, or am I just going to be a snowbird?
It's pretty much, you're not worried about the snowbird part. You're just like live in the hot and visit the cold.
Except here's the thing. I really like it to be like 70 to 80 degrees.
Okay.
So,
I mean, there's
probably Hawaii.
San Diego.
That's probably the place to go.
Something like that. Yeah.
All right. We'll consider that. Rod, today we're going to be talking about a list that I made. It's 10 things Christian hates about FIRE. Now, I should preface that by saying I'm also going to mention a handful of things that I like about it. But then we're going to really blast it with 10 things that I hate about it. What do you think?
All right. I like it. Yeah.
And your job is to give commentary. We haven't done one of these lists in a while, Rod, and you've been responsible for the outlines the last couple weeks. So it's my turn to come back with the power list.
I like it. I like your lists.
All right, let's do it. Okay. Number one. Oh, actually, Rod, we can't go into number one. We got to talk about what FIRE actually is.
Yeah.
So we probably should define it. FIRE means financial independence, retire early. That's the movement that exists out there. And honestly, I'm not sure when it started, but it's probably been like in the last 10 years, I would say. And, picked up steam. And it's kind of just like everywhere these days. So I thought, what the heck? Let's have a conversation about FIRE and, kind of what our take is on the whole FIRE movement.
Yeah.
Okay. So I have a little pet peeve I need to throw out there, Rod. I'm so tired of hearing people talk about their fake retirements. Okay, so we need to define what retire means. If I hear one more person that's like 32 that says, "Oh, I was just having so much success that I retired, and then a year later, I couldn't stay away from work, and I went back into business, and like I just can't do it anymore."
The
Rod.
best phrase is coming out of retirement.
Yeah,
right?
at 36,
like Michael
right?
Jordan.
Coming out of retirement. Like, okay, let's be really clear about what retirement actually is. Like, it has to have some element to not just like leaving your job and deciding to like take 6 months off or whatever.
Yeah.
Like, there has to be an element to having the financial independence part of it. And we're going to get into what financial independence, what it means and what it doesn't mean. But in my mind, retire early doesn't mean that I have 2 years of money saved up that I can spend. It means that I can actually determine whether I want to work or not at all. And some people do that. Like, let's be clear. Some people absolutely have achieved that. But man, I am just so tired of hearing people talk about how cool they are because they retired at 33 and then like 6 months later they started a different business or went to a different job or whatever. Like, it just doesn't hold any credibility to me.
It's fair.
Okay. Now that we've gotten that out of the way, let's talk about what I like about FIRE, Rod. The first thing I like is that it provides an actual and definitive goal to go after.
Yeah.
So I think in general, the Money Insights team is quite goal driven, right?
Right.
So when we work with people, we believe that there's goals and benchmarks that we want to achieve. And so from that standpoint, I think it's always really valuable to have goals in line or just goals out there that you're really working toward. So from that standpoint, I like that it does that. Do you have anything to add or subtract from that?
Well, goals drive you toward a plan, right? You pick a big, in the words of Good to Great, a hairy, audacious goal, a BHAG, and and then you work toward it. But you have to figure out the interim steps to get you there and create plans and all this kind of stuff. But it creates the structure around that, basically, is what you're saying.
Yeah, exactly. So really anything that, has you going toward a worthy goal is something that I can get on board with. Okay, the second thing I like is that there's a focus on keeping expenses low. And I should say that I kind of like this. Let's be clear. This isn't like the way that I view the world and work. However, I believe that it's important in order to drive net worth upward, as we talked about in our last episode. Dave made a really pointed comment that's kind of obvious but important, and that is just that in order to build your net worth, you have to spend less money than you make.
Yep.
So from that standpoint, having a focus on keeping expenses low, and I certainly think that being overly lavish and living outside your means and all those things are horrible financial ideas, and we kind of all know that. But I like the focus on keeping expenses low, at least at some level. I like that.
And one of the things that we've seen, because we work with people of a wide range of income level, and regardless of how much you make, you can spend it, right?
That's true. That is that. So just because most of the people we talk to are have high incomes, like I talked about this, that doesn't necessarily mean they're better at building wealth.
Yeah. And one of the traps that a lot of people fall into is that they've worked so hard to get to where they are. And so rightfully so, they get to a place where now they're making a lot of money, and they've been putting off a lot of things, in a lot of cases, buying a home, having a family, doing a lot of different things because they're just so committed to what they're working hard for to get to that place. And again, I'm specifically speaking of a lot of our physician clients, residency, all those kinds of things that just take a lot of time and effort and don't bring in a lot of money. So then they get to a place where now they have it and they're like, oh, now I get to live it up. Right. And again, I'm not going to tell them they shouldn't, open up and start to live a little more of the life that they have dreamed of living, but just don't get ahead of yourself. Right. So again, going back to your previous thing about having a goal, having plans, go in with a plan and start to live the dream life that you've been dreaming of, but don't get ahead of yourself.
Okay, so we're going to get into that philosophically, Rod, as we get down into some of the points that I hate. We're going to kind of dive into that philosophical debate here a little bit more. Okay, so number 3 is that I really like the focus on increasing income. Now, this is up my alley because I'm driven and excited about building wealth and helping other people build wealth. Therefore, the focus on for the FIRE people, it's usually like a combination focus of increasing income and decreasing expenses as low as you possibly can, right?
Yeah.
Both are good principles, but I really love that there is an added focus on building wealth through increasing income. And we talk about multiple streams of income and things like that. And I think those are things that you'll hear the FIRE movement group get into it to some extent. They like to talk a lot about, like side gigs and side hustles and things like that can add value and create extra wealth. I think I like to think of it more in terms of investing and creating additional streams of income and thereby doing more with your money and hopefully working less simultaneously.
Yeah. Yeah. It's creating those passive streams to replace the active, like stuff you have to be there to make happen. Right.
And that's what true retirement ends up being. If you've got income streams or a significant stream of income, that kind of is the game changer, right? Because you just know it's going to be okay. So income's important. Finally, Rod, I like that it encourages people to save and invest. Anytime we're teaching people to save and invest, I'm on board with it. So you can probably tell most of the things I like about FIRE are pretty general. And we're going to talk about kind of why I have some little bits of issues with some of the other things, but I think that covers at least the things that I like. Is there anything, Rod, that you like about FIRE that I didn't list here, or anything that's like significant that you can think about or that you think about when you're considering this whole FIRE movement?
Well, I think you've hit on them because it's that whole kind of having a very specific definition of what it is we're shooting for and what it means when we get to a place where we can FIRE. And and again, just the idea of replacing our working income, it's with passive income.
Okay,
So,
Rod, here's what I don't like about FIRE. Here's what I dare I say hate about
oh boy,
FIRE.
yep,
Yeah,
hit me.
those are strong words. And this is where it gets fun. We're gonna get into things. Okay, so here's the first thing. I don't like the common definition of retire, and I already went on a rant about that.
Mhm.
It was so important to me that I couldn't wait till we got down here. But see the beginning of the episode for how I feel about the general definition of retire that gets out there. Now, I will say this. In the FIRE crowd, the other definition that I hear is just having enough money to not have to work and live. I shouldn't even say comfortably. It's being able to live and not have to work. Like that combination would create someone. So FIRE could mean a myriad of different things for different people,
Mhm.
right? So there's probably some lack of clarity in what that means. But I think what I've heard people say is that, as an example, if you have enough money to, oh, dare I say, use the 4% rule to create enough income just to where you can live and pay your bills,
Mhm.
then that's where like
You
FIRE
qualify.
exists, right? And obviously we would say that FIRE would have to be something significantly greater in terms of your wealth creation before you would be at a place where that, moving to that
Right.
kind of lifestyle really makes sense.
Right.
Okay. Where you're not in the danger zone, right? Like, and we can get into that here. We're going to get into that here in a second. Okay. That's the first thing. I don't like the definition of retire commonly. Okay. So the second one, Rod, is that there's too much emphasis on living with as little income as possible. And oftentimes that goes to the extreme. Right. And so in my mind, I'm thinking like, okay, we have to balance between enjoying life and living life today and saving and preparing for the future. We're going to get into that more here in a second. But I also get really annoyed by some of like the gimmicky things that are out there. And one of them that I always hear is like focusing on getting credit card points as an example. Like
Okay.
it's just kind of an extreme way of doing things. Now, let me be clear. There are ways to do things and there are methods and strategies that I think are really valuable. We're going to likely have a guy on that talks about a debt pay down method that's a little bit unique and different. And I believe in, I think those kind of things can be valuable, right? But what I struggle with is like the extremes. Going too
Mhm.
far into the extremes generally takes people's life out of balance, can rob happiness and all that stuff. And so from that
Yeah.
standpoint, I'm a fan of keeping expenses low, but I feel like the FIRE movement is too focused on and like trying to get you to pinch pennies anywhere you can and just live like as simple and basic of life as you can. And to some extent, I think that can rob us of happiness.
Yeah, and maybe just a quick observation on that. From what I've seen, a lot of times that becomes a too much of a focus, or so much of a focus that it becomes the end. In other words, you lose sight of, well, what are we doing this for? And then maybe to your point, in like the credit card points or whatever it might be, where someone gets so focused on the pinching the pennies part that they forget that the reason they were doing that is so that they could get to this goal of FIRE. And so it's not driving them toward that end, I guess is what I'm getting at. Right. There's that we lose sight of the, and I don't even know if you even have to be able to definitively measure it, but we're not, right? We're not doing any kind of measuring anymore, because it's just all about what I'm doing to pinch the pennies.
Yeah. Yeah, so balance is critical. Hey, sorry for the interruption. Just wanted to let you know that you can take the F3 assessment right now over at moneyinsights.net. And after the short 5-minute assessment, you'll get specific recommendations that will help you move from high income to high net worth. Enjoy the rest of the show. Okay, so number 3, Rod, the possibility of missing out on, this is some, again, things I hate. I hate the possibility of missing out on the present day to get ready for the future. And what I find is that people are often willing to do things that they hate today, thinking that it creates happiness in the future. And there is something to that, right? It's not that there's no truth to that idea, but I have to just make the maybe obvious point that we don't have like a guaranteed future, right?
Mhm.
So some of us live to be 80 or 90, and some of us live to be 45 or 50. And I guess my thought is like, do I want to spend all of my time focused on and willing to just do things I hate because I'm hoping and expecting that things will get better later? So again, number 2 kind of builds into number 3. But I think that that's something that I struggle with. I don't think for me, and maybe when I was younger, I would have said this, but based on like the life that I've lived today, I think it's really important to balance that and make sure that we're not just trying to get by and survive. Like let's do a little bit more than that. Let's enjoy our lives and thrive.
Yeah. And
So
one
I
thing
know
that
that's
we've
kind of
seen,
cheesy, but
well, one
that's
thing that
how I'm
we've
feeling.
seen with people who are in retirement is that those feelings don't necessarily go away. Right. So we've seen people who did a great job saving, sacrificed, while they were working. So to make that possible, but then they get there and they're afraid to spend it still. Like there's just this never ending nagging feeling in the back of their brain that they don't ever want to run out of money. And we're trying to sit there and tell them, hey, you've done a great job. We can create some really cool things around what you've done to create some guaranteed streams of income, et cetera, et cetera. And yet there's this hesitancy to ever allow themselves that luxury, right? And so it's kind of sad. Like they've worked hard and yet they're still not ready or willing to, I guess, live it
Yeah,
up,
and you're
right?
never
Live the
ready.
dream that
And
they
again,
dream.
like it's the habits that you build like kind of stick with you. And so
Yep.
those are good habits, but if they're extreme, then they can become counterproductive.
Yep. And that's kind of another example of what I was saying earlier about that the means becomes the end, right? That's all you can ever think about if that is just the only focus that you have.
Okay, Rod, this next one's a little bit interesting. But the average individual's peak earning years are generally in between 40 and 50, right? And it might even be a little, I think for men, it's like 45 to 55. For women, it's a little bit earlier than that based on the statistics I read. But if the goal is to, and usually when people are talking about retire early, like there's kind of this arbitrary number of 40. Like the idea is to try to get there as soon as you can, but like you're trying to beat 40, right? Well, anyway, my point here is just that if we focus so much on retiring early and actually do it, then we might miss out on our best, most peak earning years that could help and support us for a much longer time frame to come, right? So imagine this situation. You've worked your tail off, you've saved a bunch of money, you really believe in putting your money in, qualified plans and in the market and those types of things, and you retire early, right? And then you go into the last 10 months of our market cycle.
Yeah.
Well, guess what? Your retiring early may have changed completely now, right? And we're going to talk about how people are like calculating and kind of doing this. It's amazing that it still exists, but like you could find yourself in a really difficult position. And so my point here is just that retiring early before 40 can take away those kind of peak earning years where we would have a chance to create a safety net for all of our years to come. You know what I mean? So we're not in this situation where we might be concerned about it forever instead of being like really at a place of comfort and peace.
So it sounds like that would be something you want to build into the plan side of it, right? In other words, maybe not just an accumulation only strategy. Maybe it's building in some of those streams of income so that that you can continue to build it, right? On a very part-time basis, right? Depending on what you're investing in, but if you build an engine and you can continue to feed that engine even while you're retired early, right? Then that's just something you can perpetuate and continue to build.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly, Rod. Okay. So number 4, if you retire early, miss peak earning years. Number 5 oh man, we're getting into things I really don't like, Rod. Okay. I really don't like the overemphasis on qualified plans. And this one is just so silly because obviously if your goal is to retire early and you're putting money in qualified plans, like there's a incongruency that exists there, right?
Yep.
I mean, we've got this 59.5 rule on one side, And then on the other, we have trying to retire at 40. And it doesn't make any sense to me to pump a bunch of money into qualified plans and then, have to figure out how to scrimp to get through up until that 59.5 point in time where I can start taking them without penalty.
Yeah.
So that's maybe not the only issue with it. There's another issue, and that's just that, from a tax standpoint, we're more on the Roth camp. Like the more that I can get in that side of things, the better off we'll be, just based on what we expect taxes to do in the future.
Yep.
So that's another issue. But like, between the inability to get to money during your retire early years and that emphasis on trying to tax defer money, I just think it's a horrible idea, and it doesn't make any sense inside the FIRE movement why anybody would recommend focusing on qualified plans.
I agree, and I don't have anything to add. I mean, that just
perfect.
It just kind of stands on its own because it is so incongruent.
Hey, Rod, this is another one that kind of fits in the same camp, but a little bit different. And you would expect this from us, but they are overly focused on traditional investments. And of course, that's the case, right? Everybody's overly focused on traditional investments. And so the FIRE movement is no different. There are some pockets of groups that talk about and focus on real estate and things like that. But for the most part, you're hearing the same stuff, like put your money into no load mutual fund, low cost mutual funds, target date mutual funds. Put 50% of your income into your mutual funds each month. And we'll get into how we're going to take the distributions here in a few minutes. But I just cannot stand the focus on almost exclusively traditional investments. It's just, again, it's missing the boat in such an incredible way. Like, people are not realizing that there's alternative options that they could go to that are so much more attractive. And the only thing keeping them from it is just that they don't know about it.
Yeah, well, and here again, the irony is if they're being recommended to put into those target date funds, well, target date funds aren't built around someone retiring at 40.
That's a good point.
Right. So it's all built around the traditional, 65, 67 year time frame. And so
yeah, that doesn't match either. So that's kind of an odd one. I hadn't even thought about it, but I have heard people talking about that way to do it. And it probably doesn't have like some monumental impact if you're at 70 or 80%. Anyway, okay, Rod, I think that's good. So we don't like the overemphasis on qualified plans. We don't like the overemphasis on traditional investments. And we certainly don't like the idea of target date funds.
Yeah.
Okay, number 7, Rod. There are oftentimes unrealistic nest egg expectations. And this goes back to the extreme comment that I keep making. And my thought here is that sometimes I'm hearing people have these nest eggs expectations that are really small, right? They're thinking like, okay, as long as I save $482,000, I will have achieved my FIRE, right? Like, and again, I realize for every person that's different. And if you're living an extremely low cost lifestyle, like, you could potentially do some of these things. But again, it just feels to me like it's living on the edge in a lot of ways, right? Like, I don't know how you can call FIRE being at a place where you have to pinch pennies just in order to get by. That to me doesn't resonate. It doesn't make sense. Again, I get it that everyone's different, but from my perspective, the nest egg that a person, if they're going to use that style of approach from a planning perspective, like, it better be pretty darn big to make sure that it's going to cover the duration of my life.
Absolutely. Well, especially because, well, I know we're going to get into a little more here with the 4% rule, but just the idea of volatility. And you mentioned it here a minute ago again as well, that I'm counting on certain things happening if, like you said, the $482,000 at the 4% puts me at what, like $17,000 a year. and so, again,
and they'd be like, well, that covers my groceries, my car payment.
Yeah. My house is paid off. So
my house is paid off. So I'm okay there. Like, yeah. And again, it's just today for some people that works, but like, I hope they were building in an 8% or 10% inflation rate for last year.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Yep, that's it. Yeah, that's exactly it. Because again, depending on where they're invested, volatility exists, and or if they say, well, I'll go a little more on the fixed side, well, the last 10 years wouldn't have been great for them, right?
Yeah, that's true.
So it's hard. Like, no matter what method you pick, and you're counting on that happening. Okay, so here's an interesting conversation I had just this last weekend. I bumped into a guy who's a university professor in financial planning, and so I just assumed that he was totally on board with all the things that
I would
you
have
hate.
assumed the exact same thing.
And so, but I was straight up with him. I was like, well, these are the kinds of things we're doing. We work in life insurance, and so probably, not along the lines of kind of what you think and you teach. And he says, well, actually, I don't think that the regular accumulation strategy for retirement works. He said there are some people it can work for, but I think for most of us, the idea that we're just going to save enough and be ready to retire. And again, this is just in regular retirement, right? This is mid 60s or 70 years old to be ready to retire. And even then, supporting 20 to 25 years worth of income, or 30, right?
So imagine supporting 50, 60 years, 55 years. Like, that's insane.
Yep. So, and it makes sense too, right? Like, for example, think about like the traditional way of a 401k, right? You go to work, they say, hey, do you want to participate in the 401k? Even the best matching options out there, they say, hey, you put in 6% and we'll match 100% of what you put in. Sounds great, right? That's 12%. Sounds like a really big number. And it is compared to what most anyone else gets offered as far as matches go. But
that's true.
Even that person at 12% of your income, if that's the income I need to replace when I retire, which it's not, it's going to be much bigger by the time we get there, right? With inflation. But the point is 12% isn't going to get you there, right?
No, it's
you
not.
have to be setting aside 20, 30, 40% to get there in your mid 60s. And so now if you want to retire by 40 and you're using this accumulation method, then you're going to have to save 60, 70, 80% of your working income to be ready.
Well, good news, Rod. That's what the FIRE movement people will tell you to do.
Yep.
So
they give you that path.
Sweat. Okay, number 8, Rod. I hate that FIRE influencers are still touting the 4% rule.
Crazy.
The 4%, that's the rule, the 4% rule. Okay, so really quick, Rod, remind everybody what the 4% rule is.
Basically, whatever nest egg, so we just talked about nest egg, you build up your nest egg. When you're ready to retire, you can take out 4% as a starting point, 4% of that nest egg to live off of.
So what's the problem with it, right? Like, okay, I'm going to let you pontificate first. What's the problem with the 4% rule?
Okay, so there are a lot of problems. Number one is going back to the nest egg thing. If I need $100,000 a year to live off of, well, I'm going to need $2.5 million sitting there to start taking 4% of that and live off, right? So that's problem number one.
Accumulating enough money to actually make the concept even work is super difficult and more than most people are able to save.
Yeah. And then secondly, one of the things that the 4% rule is based off of is what they call Monte Carlo simulations, where they take the individual. So here I am, right? I'm ready to retire. I go to my advisor and I say, hey, help me do this. And they say, great, let's run some simulations. So they say, we're going to simulate you retiring in 1,000 different time frames, September 3rd, 1967 or March 4th, 1982 or whatever, right? They're going to simulate me retiring and how it worked out for me, or the likelihood of me having even $1.
Even one.
By
That's
the time
success,
I pass
by
away.
the way. If you have $1 left when you're alive, that is success.
Yep. And so, and then it attaches a probability to that, right? So I want my $100,000 of income, 4% rule. They plug it in and they say, okay, you have 78% chance of still having $1 left if you started taking the income now and you live 25 years. Right.
Okay. So this is where it becomes such a huge issue for the FIRE movement.
Yep.
You've got to have it last for 40 or 50 years.
Yep.
And certainly if we're struggling to make it work, right? If it's only working 75% of the time with the 4% rule, then if we're trying to go 50 years, then it's going to work only 30% of the time or 40% of the time. And then you have to ask yourself, okay, how comfortable am I on a retirement that's only, 50-50?
Yeah.
Most people don't get real excited about that, but that's what's happening. Now, I will say this. I've heard them back the concept down a little bit and say instead of 4%, it's 3.5%. And then they've kind of gone back. And I've even heard somebody recently in the FIRE movement world that had attached to like 2.875. And I don't remember how he got there, but it was like just under 3%. And they felt like that was the number that was going to work and be successful.
Yeah.
So here's the thing, like the 4% rule is ridiculous, but the whole concept is ridiculous, right? Like there's so many better ways to create consistent cash flow and income than just trying to put as much money in the market as we can and draw our income exclusively from that. So maybe what I don't like more than anything is the concept that exists behind the 4% rule. But certainly, if you're thinking you're going to FIRE with the 4% rule, you're probably kidding yourself.
Yep.
Okay, number 9, Rod. And this is kind of a funny one, just an ironic thing that I've noticed. Most people touting FIRE are the influencers who don't actually have to do what they're suggesting. Or maybe they did it for like a year or two, right? It was like, oh, like I made these sacrifices for a year and I documented it. And then like I started bringing income in from my blog and from doing other things. Like a lot of the influencers are talking about it and they don't actually have to live the lifestyle themselves, right? So there to me seems like an incongruency between what they're having to do and what they're teaching. Well, certainly if I'm an influencer that has, 50,000, 100,000 followers and have managed to turn that into a revenue stream, sometimes it can be pretty significant, right? So anyway, my point here is just that you have to be careful because a lot of the people who are touting these kind of bad ideas that we're laying out aren't actually having to live those principles themselves.
And I think that's true in the FIRE movement and even outside of that, just in terms of a lot of the gurus, right? Where they've built up a business and their net worth, their income, their ability to
we
retire
see it all the time,
right, is going to come not from all the accumulation and the 4% rule and all these other things that we're talking about. It's going to come from the things that we prefer, which is passive streams of income, etc. Right?
Yeah, investing in their businesses and those types of things. Okay, Rod. So number 10, and this is kind of the crux of the whole thing here. My issue with the FIRE movement is that I believe there's too much focus on the destination and not enough focus on the journey. I know that's like a cliche thing to say, but again, as I get older and I'm getting old, I think I saw a few gray hairs, Rod.
Oh boy.
And I'm going to be turning 39 in just a few days. So
40 is just around the corner.
I know 40 is around. So here's the thing though. I've realized as I've gotten older, like I don't want to live a life that's trying to pinch pennies and be extreme. Like I'm trying to enjoy the moment now and still be balanced toward preparing for the future.
Yeah.
So certainly, balance is the key. But again, what I don't like about it is I really believe that it could potentially rob us of the joy of life because we're focused too much on something that may not even happen. I've told this story probably on the podcast, but my dad passed away at the ripe old age of 49. And I think about that and I'm 10 years away from that. And it's crazy to me to think that you just don't know what's going to happen. You don't know what the future holds. And for that reason, living that kind of a lifestyle, again, for me, and I realize each person's different. Like, let's be real here. But for me, after the experiences that I've seen, I want to do it right today. But I also want to live my life and enjoy it. And so those are basically, Rod, the 10 reasons that I hate the FIRE movement.
I think that's a great summation. Just the idea that if we take ourselves to the extremes, then we lose sight of one or the other, right? So what you're not saying is forget about the future, right? You're saying, yes, the future matters, but today matters too. Right?
Yeah, thank you for summing that up because that is important. That is critical, in fact. We're definitely not saying don't plan for the future, right?
Yep.
But what I am saying is, you probably don't need to save 72% of your income in order to live like a great future retirement lifestyle. You know what I mean?
Yep.
Okay, Rod, I think that's game, set, and match for us for the day. Thanks everybody for hanging out with us today, and we will see you all next week on the Money Insights podcast.
Thank you for listening to the Money Insights podcast. To learn more about the financial and business strategies discussed in this show, please visit moneyinsights.net. The views and opinions expressed on the Money Insights podcast are not intended to be individual financial, tax, or legal advice. Always consult with the appropriate advisor before making financial decisions. And if you're enjoying the show, please feel free to rate, subscribe, and leave a review wherever you listen to your podcasts. This will help others find the show and learn wealth building strategies for themselves. Thanks again for tuning in, and we'll catch you in the next episode.
Equities to debt.